The doorbell rang just after noon, sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet hum of my old ceiling fan. I wiped my hands on the faded apron tied around my waist and glanced at the clock. Mother's Day. Of course it was today. When I opened the door, my son stood there holding a bouquet so bright it almost hurt my eyes. Yellow lilies. Fresh. Expensive. The kind you don't find at the corner store. "Mom," Lucas said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. His smile was warm, practiced, the smile of a man who lives most of his life in boardrooms and airports. Happy Mother's Day. I stepped aside to let him in, the flowers already feeling like something I didn't deserve to touch. My small house on the edge of Plano creaked as he walked through, his polished shoes too clean for the worn wooden floor. He placed the bouquet on the table and looked around, brows knitting just slightly. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "Vanessa's still giving you the $5,000 every month, right? I just want to be sure you're comfortable." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 5,000? The room seemed to tilt. My fingers tightened around the back of a chair as my heart began to pound loud enough that I was sure he could hear it. "Lucas?" I said carefully, my voice barely steady. "The church helps me when I need it." His smile disappeared. Before he could speak again, heels clicked against the floor behind him. Vanessa entered like she owned the space. Tailored silk dress, glossy hair, perfume so sharp it erased the smell of the soup I'd been reheating for lunch. She looked flawless, untouched by worry. "Oh, Eleanor," she said brightly, her smile stretched thin. Don't tell me you're forgetting again. I stop by every month, remember?" I looked at her calmly, too calmly. "If you've been bringing money, then it never reached me." Silence settled between us, thick and heavy. Lucas turned toward her, confusion creasing his face. "Vanessa, I've been transferring it to you every month." She didn't hesitate. "Of course you have. Your mother just gets mixed up sometimes. You know how memory works at her age." Her words were soft, but they landed hard. I said nothing. I simply nodded and moved toward the kitchen, my hands trembling just enough to betray me. But inside, something had awakened, because I knew my memory. And I knew, without doubt, that no envelope had ever crossed my doorstep. That night, as I sat alone, counting the coins left in my purse, one question burned through me. If the money was sent, then who had been living off it all this time? After Lucas and Vanessa left, the house felt smaller than usual. Their footsteps lingered in the air long after the door closed, as if the walls themselves were replaying the conversation on a loop. I stood in the living room for several minutes, staring at the bouquet on the table. The yellow lilies looked out of place, too alive for a room that suddenly felt hollow. $5,000 a month. I lowered myself onto the sofa, the cushions sighing under my weight. 8 months, Lucas had said, without realizing it. 8 months meant $40,000. I did the math slowly, not because it was hard, but because I didn't want to believe it. That money could have fixed the leak in the roof that I'd been catching with a bucket every time it rained. It could have replaced the refrigerator that rattled like it might give up any day now. Instead, I had learned how to stretch soup for 3 meals and how to smile politely when church volunteers dropped off groceries in brown paper bags. I wasn't angry yet. I was tired. This house on the outskirts of Plano had seen better days. It used to be loud, filled with my husband's laughter, Lucas's footsteps running down the hallway, doors slamming, music playing too loudly. After my husband passed, the noise slowly drained away, leaving behind a place that had learned how to stay quiet. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands still shaking. On the fridge door hung a calendar from St. Andrew's Community Chapel, each square neatly marked with reminders: Bible study, soup kitchen days, utility bill due dates. Nothing about luxury, nothing about $5,000. That evening, I pulled out the old ledger I kept tucked inside a drawer. I hadn't used it much lately, but habits don't disappear just because life changes. Line by line, I flipped through the pages. Electric bill, medication, church tithe, groceries, small, careful amounts. There was no mystery deposit hiding between the lines, no forgotten transfers, just proof of how tightly I'd been living. Around sunset, I sat at the dining table with my notebook, the one I usually reserved for prayer requests and grocery lists. I hesitated, pen hovering above the paper, then wrote something different. Find the truth. I stared at the words for a long moment. Vanessa's voice echoed in my head, smooth and certain. Memory works differently at your age. I closed my eyes. My memory was fine. I remembered every knock on my door, every visit, every empty-handed smile. And I remembered something else, too. How confident Vanessa had looked when she spoke. Not nervous, not uncertain, certain. That certainty frightened me more than anger ever could. Outside, the sky darkened into deep blue. Cars passed occasionally on the road, their headlights sweeping across the walls like passing thoughts. I realized then that whatever this was, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was something deliberate. And for the first time since my husband's funeral, I felt a familiar sensation return: resolve. The next morning, I decided I would do the one thing Vanessa never expected. I would check the numbers myself. The bank opened at 9, but I arrived 10 minutes early. I sat on the hard plastic chair near the entrance of First Horizon Community Bank, my purse resting on my lap, my fingers wrapped tightly around the strap. The glass doors reflected my image back at me, gray hair pulled neatly into a bun, sensible shoes, a cardigan that had seen too many winters. I looked exactly like the kind of woman people assume doesn't ask questions. When the doors finally opened, I walked inside and approached the counter. A young teller with kind eyes and a name badge that read Emily greeted me. "Good morning. How can I help you?" I slid my passbook across the counter. "I need to check if there have been any transfers into my account. From my son." She typed for a moment, her fingers moving quickly, then paused. Her expression shifted, subtle, but I noticed. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore," she said gently. "There haven't been any incoming transfers, just your interest credit back in February." The words landed softly, but their weight was crushing. "No deposits?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She shook her head. "None." I thanked her, gathered my things, and walked back outside. The morning air felt sharper than before, biting against my cheeks as I stood on the sidewalk, staring at nothing in particular. Cars passed, life continued, but something inside me settled into certainty. There had never been money sent to me, not once. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my ledger again. Numbers had always been honest companions. I'd balanced budgets for years back when Lucas was growing up, when my husband and I were trying to build a life from scratch. Numbers don't forget. People do. I wrote the date at the top of a fresh page and recorded what the teller had said. No deposits, no transfers, no errors. That afternoon, I went to St. Andrew's Community Chapel. Reverend Harris noticed me lingering after service and walked over. "Eleanor," he said kindly, "you look troubled." I smiled the polite smile I'd perfected over the years. "Just tired." He nodded, not pushing. Some truths need time before they're spoken aloud. That evening, I sat by the window watching the sun slip behind the houses across the street. My phone lay silent on the table. No calls from Lucas, no messages from Vanessa. I opened my notebook again and wrote another line beneath the first. Trust evidence, not words. I thought about Vanessa's confidence, about the way Lucas hadn't questioned her explanation, about how easily age had been used as a shield against accountability. I wasn't weak. I wasn't confused. I was simply underestimated. And I had lived long enough to know that underestimation is often a mistake. That night, I made a quiet decision. If the money wasn't coming to me, then someone had opened an account in my name. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake, listening to the old clock ticking in the hallway, each second stretching longer than the last. By morning, my decision was firm. Guessing would get me nowhere. I needed confirmation. Real confirmation. After breakfast, I walked to the small post office 2 streets over. There was a public phone booth just outside, rarely used anymore, but it offered something my house didn't: privacy. If someone was watching my calls, I didn't want them to know. I dialed Lucas's office. After a brief hold, a woman answered. "Whitmore Solutions, Accounting Department." "My name is Eleanor Whitmore," I said calmly. "I'm Lucas Whitmore's mother. I have a question regarding a recurring transfer he mentioned." There was a pause. Papers shuffled. "I'm not sure I can discuss—" "I'm not asking for amounts," I interrupted gently, "only confirmation that transfers were made." Another pause. Then her voice softened. "I can confirm that a transfer has been processed monthly, same amount, same date." My grip tightened on the receiver. "And the recipient?" A breath. "The recipient name matches yours, Mrs. Whitmore, but the account number does not." The words rang in my ears long after the call ended. An account under my name, but not mine. I walked home slowly, each step deliberate. Someone hadn't just taken money, they'd planned this, carefully, methodically, with access to documents and confidence that no one would look too closely. Inside my house, I sat at the dining table and opened my notebook to a fresh page. There is another account. I wrote the date, the time, the exact phrasing the woman had used. I didn't rush. Precision mattered now. Over the next few days, Vanessa continued her visits. She arrived smiling, carrying small gifts, cookies, candles, flowers, always something decorative, never anything practical, never an envelope. Each time, she repeated the same lines. "The transfer's already been sent. Banks are slow these days. You should really relax." And each time I nodded. I thanked her. I said nothing. But when she left, I wrote everything down. Dates, times, her words. I wasn't gathering ammunition. I was gathering truth. One afternoon, while watering the garden, I noticed her new car, a sleek silver sedan with temporary plates. It gleamed in the sunlight, flawless and expensive. I smiled politely. "It's beautiful." "Oh, it's just a lease," she said, quickly. Too quickly. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, the house quiet around me. I looked at the neat rows of handwriting filling the pages. Someone once told me that lies collapse when they're forced to exist on paper. I believed that now. And I understood something else, too. Vanessa hadn't counted on one thing. She hadn't counted on patience. By the end of that week, I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who understood numbers better than lies. The knock came just after 10 in the morning. It wasn't hurried or polite. It was firm, deliberate. The kind of knock that belonged to someone who expected to be heard. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. The man standing on my porch wore a gray suit that had seen better days and carried a leather briefcase tucked neatly under his arm. His hair was silver at the temples, his expression serious but not unkind. "Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore?" he asked. "Yes." "My name is Harold Benton," he said. "I handle senior accounts at Whitmore Solutions. I believe we need to talk." Something in his tone told me this wasn't a casual visit. I invited him inside and poured us both a glass of water. Sunlight filtered through the curtains as he set his briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside were neatly organized documents, bank statements, transfer confirmations, and printed logs. I became aware of an irregularity. he began carefully. Monthly transfers were authorized under your name, but the destination account was opened and controlled by your daughter-in-law. I didn't react. I had already grieved this truth in silence. How much? I asked. $40,000, he replied, over 8 months. He paused before continuing. There are additional concerns. Corporate cards, personal expenses, travel, a vehicle down payment. The words fell into place like puzzle pieces snapping together. She forged my identity, I said quietly. He nodded. Yes. I opened my notebook and turned it toward him, page after page filled with dates and notes. His eyes widened slightly as he scanned the entries. You documented everything, he said. I trusted my memory, I replied. He closed the folder and met my gaze. If you want to pursue this, I'll help you, but we must proceed carefully. She's confident. That makes her dangerous. I smiled faintly. Confidence only works when no one checks the numbers. Harold stood to leave, but paused at the door. One more thing, Mrs. Whitmore. Your son doesn't know. I nodded. Not yet. After he left, I sat alone in the quiet house. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel small. I felt prepared. I wrote one final line in my notebook for the day. I have an ally. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of Lane. I closed the notebook and rested my hands on its cover. Vanessa believed silence meant weakness. She was wrong. That evening, I picked up the phone and invited Lucas and Vanessa to dinner, because the truth sounds louder when everyone is seated at the same table. I spent the afternoon preparing a meal I hadn't cooked in years. Nothing extravagant. Roast chicken, seasoned the way Lucas liked it when he was young, mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed lightly with garlic. Comfort food, familiar food, the kind that lowers defenses. The table was set neatly, the good plates brought out from the cabinet where they usually gathered dust. I even placed the yellow lilies in a vase at the center, their brightness almost mocking. Lucas arrived first. He stepped inside, loosening his tie, and smiled when he smelled the food. Wow, Mom, this brings back memories. That's the idea, I replied. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes later, perfectly on time, perfectly composed. She kissed my cheek, complimented the table, and slipped into her chair like a woman who had nothing to hide. Dinner began pleasantly. Lucas talked about work. Vanessa mentioned a charity event. I listened. I nodded. I waited. When the plates were nearly empty, I folded my napkin carefully and set it aside. Lucas, I said calmly, I went to the bank. The room shifted. He looked up. You did? Yes. They confirmed something interesting. Vanessa's fork paused midair. There have been no deposits into my account. Not one. Lucas frowned. That doesn't make sense. I've been sending the money every month. I know, I said, meeting his eyes. I confirmed that, too. Vanessa laughed lightly. Eleanor, we've been over this. I turned toward her. The account receiving the funds is under my name, but it is not mine. Silence fell heavy and absolute. Lucas turned slowly toward Vanessa. What does she mean? She recovered quickly. Too quickly. There must be a mix-up. Banks make mistakes all the time. I reached under the table and pulled out my notebook, setting it between us. No, I said. People make mistakes. Banks keep records. I opened to a page and read aloud dates and amounts. Transfers, account numbers, confirmation calls. Vanessa's smile began to crack. Lucas pushed his chair back slightly. Vanessa? Her voice sharpened. This is ridiculous. She's being manipulated. She's confused. I looked at my son. Do I seem confused to you? He didn't answer. Vanessa stood abruptly. I think we should leave. I nodded. You should. As they walked toward the door, I added one final sentence. The accountant knows. Vanessa froze. She didn't turn around. She didn't say a word. The door closed behind them with a sound that echoed through the house. An hour later, my phone rang, and the voice on the other end was shaking.
The phone rang once. I let it ring again before answering. "Mom?" Lucas's voice came through tight, strained. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied, lowering myself into the chair by the window. There was a pause. I could hear movement in the background, footsteps, a door closing, the muffled hum of a television turned low. "She says you misunderstood," he began, "that it was just temporary, that she planned to pay it back." I closed my eyes. "That's not how honesty works," I said quietly. Another silence, longer this time. "She admitted it," he finally said. "Part of it." The word part lingered between us. Lucas exhaled sharply. "She said she needed the money, that things got out of hand, that she never thought you'd notice." I thought of the ledger, the bank, the months of careful living. "I noticed," I said. "I know," he replied, his voice breaking. "And I'm sorry." I could hear the weight of it settling on him. The betrayal, the embarrassment, the realization that trust had been misplaced. "I've asked her to move out. Just for now, until we figure this out." "For now," I repeated. Not a question, an observation. "She wants to talk to you," he added cautiously, "to explain." "I don't need explanations. I need accountability." He swallowed. "What do you want to do?" I looked down at my notebook resting on the table. Its pages were filled now, no longer empty, no longer silent. "I want the money returned, every dollar, and I want this documented properly." He didn't hesitate. "It will be." When the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time. The house felt different now, lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. That evening, Harold Benton called. "She's panicking," he said plainly, "trying to shift funds, close accounts." "Can she?" I asked. "No, not anymore." I smiled to myself. Vanessa had built her certainty on secrecy, and secrecy collapses the moment light finds it. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, watching steam rise from the cup. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to peace. But I knew better to relax too soon. People who are cornered don't always surrender quietly. The next morning, I received a message I hadn't expected. Vanessa wanted to meet me alone. Vanessa chose the place. A small cafe just off the highway, all glass windows and neutral colors, the kind of place designed to feel safe and public. I arrived 10 minutes early and took a seat near the window, my purse on the chair beside me, my notebook tucked discreetly inside. She arrived exactly on time. Her appearance startled me. The polished confidence was still there, but something underneath had shifted. Dark circles hugged her eyes. Her movements were sharper, less controlled. She sat down without greeting me and placed her phone face down on the table. "I didn't want Lucas here," she said. "This is between us." I folded my hands. "You made it that way." Her lips pressed together. "I never meant to hurt you." I didn't respond. "I was under pressure," she continued quickly. "Expectations, image, Lucas's work circles, they notice everything. I needed to keep up." I tilted my head slightly. "By stealing from me?" She flinched. "I was going to replace it," she insisted, "once things stabilized." "You had 8 months. You bought a car." Her gaze dropped. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, she looked up. "What do you want?" The question wasn't defiant. It was fearful. "I want restitution," I said. "In writing,
with a schedule, and I want the account closed immediately. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. And if I can't? I met her eyes. Then Harold Benton hands the file to legal. She swallowed hard. "You'd really do that?" she asked. "I already am," I replied calmly. Her shoulders sagged. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked young, uncertain. "I didn't think you'd fight," she whispered. I stood, placing my napkin on the table. People mistake kindness for weakness. That's their error, not mine. As I walked out, I didn't look back. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. My reflections stared back at me in the windshield. Older, yes, but steadier than I'd ever felt. That evening, a document arrived in my email. A repayment plan. It wasn't complete, it wasn't generous, but it was a beginning. 2 days later, Harold called. With a warning, Vanessa wasn't just repaying money, she was preparing an escape. Harold's call came just after dawn. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said without preamble, "she's moving fast." I sat upright in bed, the sheets still tangled around my legs. "How fast?" "She's liquidating assets, selling the car, closing personal credit lines. There's talk of relocating, out of state." I closed my eyes. "She's trying to disappear," I said. "Yes," he confirmed. "And if she does before restitution is secured, recovery becomes complicated." By mid-morning, Lucas arrived at my house unannounced. He looked exhausted. Tie loosened, eyes red, shoulders slumped under the weight of decisions he never expected to make. "She's leaving," he said flatly. "Packed half her things already." I poured him coffee and set the mug in front of him. "Running doesn't erase records." He rubbed his temples. "I trusted her." "I know, and that's why this hurts." He stared into the coffee as if answers might surface there. "What do we do?" I reached for my notebook. "We follow procedure, and we protect what's left." That afternoon, Harold filed a formal financial hold. The account, under my name, my stolen name, was frozen. Transfers stopped, assets flagged. Vanessa called me 3 times. I didn't answer. Her final message was brief. "You're ruining my life." I listened to it once, then deleted it. That evening, I stood in my garden, watering the plants as the sun dipped low. The routine steadied me. Some things still responded to care, to consistency. Inside, the phone rang again. This time, I answered. "It's done," Harold said. "She can't move the money." I exhaled slowly, but relief was short-lived. "She's blaming you," he added, "and she's angry." I thought of the cafe, of the fear in her eyes. Fear had hardened into something sharper now. "Angry people make mistakes," I said. "Yes," he agreed. "They do." After the call, I sat at the table and wrote a single sentence in my notebook. Prepare for escalation. Because this was no longer just about money. It was about control. The next day, a legal notice arrived at my door, and Vanessa's name was on it. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. The paper inside, crisp and official, carried Vanessa's name in bold. My hand trembled slightly as I read the heading. Notice of legal action. I sank into the armchair, trying to steady my breath. Lucas was the first person I called, but there was no answer. His phone went straight to voicemail. Harold arrived within the hour, moving quickly through my front door. He carried a folder that smelled faintly of ink and leather. "She's escalated," he said without preamble, flipping the folder open. "Filed for a civil injunction, claiming you interfered with her finances." I read the documents, the lines blurring together. This is baseless," I said, my voice tight. "All her accounts, her assets, everything she's trying to take is documented. She can't just claim this against me." Harold nodded. "Legally, she can. That doesn't mean she'll win, but it complicates things. Court's slow, and in the meantime, any attempt to move money becomes messier. I rubbed my temples. My garden, my routine, the small sense of control I had held on to, it all felt fragile now. So we fight this in court? Yes, Harold said firmly. But first, we gather every piece of evidence she can't dispute. Emails, financial transfers, her communications, everything. The phone rang again. It was Vanessa, but I didn't answer. Her voicemail was calm, unnervingly so. You'll regret this. I know what you've done. Be careful. I deleted it without listening again. Fear had sharpened into something colder, something calculated. That night, I couldn't sleep. My notebook lay open on the table, the words from earlier still staring back at me. Prepare for escalation. I added a new line beneath it. Document everything. Track her moves. She won't see us coming. By dawn, I had a strategy forming. Harold would handle the legal groundwork, tracking, and freezes. I would gather proof, organize timelines, and make sure nothing was left ambiguous. Vanessa's game was escalating, but so was my resolve. She had thought she could vanish, rewrite history, and pin blame on me. Now, the board was being reset, and I wasn't going to lose. Not to fear, not to greed, not to her. The next morning, I arrived at my office to find an unexpected visitor waiting, someone connected to Vanessa, and they weren't friendly.
The office felt colder than usual when I arrived. My coat was still damp from the morning drizzle, and the street outside hummed with the faint noise of early commuters. But it wasn't the weather or the city that put me on edge. It was the figure standing by the reception desk. He was tall, sharply dressed, with eyes that scanned the room like a predator calculating its next move. A briefcase hung from one hand, leather worn but polished. I recognized him instantly from a photo in Harold's files. Marcus Trent, Vanessa's legal advisor, or more accurately, her enforcer in disguise. He looked at me with an unnerving calm. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, voice smooth, almost cordial, "we need to talk." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About her," he said, tapping the briefcase, "and the assets she claims you interfered with." I didn't move. My instincts screamed that this was more than a casual visit. "You'll have to schedule an appointment," I said. He smiled faintly. "I don't schedule, not for matters like this." Harold arrived behind me, already sensing the tension. "I can take it from here," he said, stepping forward, but Marcus held up a hand. "No, Mr. Harold, this is personal," Marcus said. His gaze sharpened, assessing both of us. "You see, Vanessa doesn't play fair, and neither do I when it comes to her." I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. "If this is a threat, I suggest you leave. Legal channels exist for a reason." Marcus tilted his head. "Consider it a courtesy visit. She doesn't want trouble, yet. But if you push too hard, you'll create it yourself." He opened the briefcase slightly, enough that I caught a glimpse of papers and photos, financial records, bank statements, and photographs of people I didn't recognize. He wasn't bluffing. Before I could respond, he snapped the briefcase shut and turned toward the door. "We'll be in touch. Soon." And just like that, he was gone. The echo of his polished shoes on the floor lingered longer than the man himself. I exhaled, my hands trembling slightly. This was no longer about Vanessa alone. She had allies, people willing to intimidate, to push, to manipulate. Harold placed a hand on my shoulder. "We need to tighten security. Every document, every interaction. No mistakes." I nodded, already thinking 2 steps ahead. I returned to my desk and wrote a single phrase in my notebook. "Expand the perimeter. She's not alone." Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the storm about to descend. That night, a window at my apartment rattled, a shadow slipped past the blinds, and I knew someone had been watching. I didn't sleep that night.
Every creak of the building, every car horn outside felt like a signal. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now seemed exposed, vulnerable. At around 2 a.m., the window rattled again. I froze, clutching the blanket. Shadows stretched across the floor, then vanished as a gust of wind swept through the slightly open sash. But I knew it wasn't the wind. Someone had been there. Harold arrived within the hour. He'd kept a quiet watch outside, hidden in the shadows, as I slept, or tried to. "Someone's watching," I said, without preamble, my voice low. Harold's expression was grave. "I saw, and it wasn't the first time. I've been tracking unusual activity near your apartment. Cameras disabled, tails spotted, cars circling. Vanessa's network is more extensive than we thought." I rubbed my temples. "So we're under surveillance, and she's escalating legally, and now she's got people watching me at home." "Yes," Harold confirmed. "This isn't just intimidation. She's testing boundaries, seeing how far she can push without making a visible move. But there's an opportunity in this." I frowned. "Opportunity?" "We can turn it against her. If she's watching, she's revealing patterns, vehicles, timing, methods. We log everything, track everything. Then we use it when she makes a bigger move." I nodded, a plan forming. Fear couldn't control us, not now. I moved to the window, keeping the blinds tightly drawn, and peered through the narrow gap. The street was empty, silent under the glow of streetlights, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way. I spent the rest of the night coordinating with Harold. Cameras, motion sensors, and a list of nearby vantage points. Every angle covered, every possible approach considered. By dawn, I was exhausted but alert. Coffee in hand, I reviewed the notebook, filling in the latest entries, document every shadow, log every sound, anticipate escalation. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have ignored the warnings. She's closer than you think." I stared at it, heart hammering. Vanessa's reach was growing, and someone was delivering her messages personally now. Harold's voice came over my shoulder. "This is the warning stage. She wants to see your reaction, test your limits. We don't react. We prepare." I set the phone down and stared out the window toward the empty street. But the silence was only temporary. The hunt had begun, and I had to stay 3 steps ahead. Later that day, a package arrived, unmarked, heavy, and with no return address. I didn't need to open it to know. It was from Vanessa. The package sat on my desk like a shadow, its plain brown exterior betraying nothing. No markings, no stamps, no hint of the sender. Yet I didn't need to guess. I hesitated before touching it, running my fingers over the smooth surface. The weight was unsettling. Too heavy for something harmless, too light for a weapon. My instincts screamed caution. Harold was already there, watching me with steady eyes. "Don't open it here," he warned. "We treat everything as a potential threat. Outside, controlled." I nodded and carried it to the small courtyard behind my building. The morning sun had just broken through clouds, offering enough light to see clearly, but not enough to draw attention. Harold followed, tools and protective gloves in hand. Together, we carefully unwrapped the layers. First the tape, then thick, brown paper, revealing a smaller box inside. I opened it slowly, heart pounding. Inside, there was only a single object. A photograph. I recognized it instantly. It was a picture of me, taken from the cafe a week ago, unnoticed by me, unnoticed by anyone else. In the background, a figure hovered just at the edge of the frame. Vanessa, smiling faintly, camera in hand. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her presence even through the photograph. Harold examined it carefully. "She's sending a message, not just intimidation. This is surveillance proof. She wants you to know she's watching. She can reach anywhere." I clenched my jaw. She wants fear. She wants me to hesitate. Yes, Harold said, but we don't give her that. We log it, we analyze it, we use it. I studied the photo again, my notebook open in front of me. Patterns, locations, possibilities. Each detail mattered. The angle of the shot, the lighting, the reflections in the window behind me. Clues that could become leverage. I wrote a single line beneath my previous notes. She's closer than expected. Trace every move. A sense of urgency settled over me. Vanessa's reach wasn't just financial anymore. She was personal, invasive, calculating. She had eyes everywhere, or at least she wanted me to believe she did. Later that evening, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. A voice, calm but cold, whispered, "You should have opened the box sooner. We're all watching now." I hung up. Harold leaned over, concern etched across his face. This is her warning phase. Next, she'll test boundaries physically. We need to be ready for anything. I nodded, closing my notebook with deliberate force. Fear was no longer an option. Only preparation, only control. That night, a car slowly circled my building twice before disappearing into the darkness, and I knew someone had just crossed the line. Sleep was elusive. Every sound outside my apartment felt amplified. The scrape of tires, distant voices, even the faint hum of a streetlight. I kept my phone close, notebook open, and eyes darting to the window every few minutes. Then I heard it, the faint click of a door latch. Not my door. Someone had picked the side service entrance. I froze, listening. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet, except for the faintest rustle near the kitchen. Harold was on the line immediately after I whispered, "She's inside." "Stay calm. Don't confront anyone," he said, voice steady. "Find a secure room, lock yourself in, and stay on the line with me." I moved silently, counting each step. My hand rested on the knob of the small office I'd converted into a safe room. I shut the door quietly and turned the lock. Through the small window in the door, I saw her, a figure in dark clothing moving cautiously, almost methodically across the apartment. Vanessa's signature style, or one of her enforcers? Hard to tell. Whoever it was, they weren't there for a casual scare. I whispered to Harold, giving him updates as the intruder rifled through drawers, carefully scanning for documents or devices. My heart raced, but I kept steady. I had to. Panic would get me caught. "She's looking for evidence," Harold said calmly. "Let her. We need to know what she's after. Document every sound, every movement. She can't take what she can't find." Minutes stretched like hours. Footsteps, the scrape of paper, the faint jingle of metal. Then silence. I strained to hear the figure move back toward the door, but they stopped, paused. I heard breathing, steady, controlled, and then a whisper, almost inaudible. "Not enough. Next time you won't be so lucky." A soft click and the service door closed behind them. I exhaled slowly, shaking but alive. The intruder had left as quietly as they'd entered. Harold arrived within 20 minutes, surveying the apartment with a trained eye. They took nothing, but now we know how close she's willing to get and how personal this is becoming. I sank into my chair, rubbing my face. Fear and determination warred inside me. Vanessa wasn't just testing boundaries. She was probing, learning, sizing up weaknesses. I reopened my notebook and added a new line. "Fortify all entries. Next breach inevitable. Prepare countermeasures." Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the silent war raging in this small apartment. By dawn, a new message appeared on my phone, this time with a photograph I hadn't seen before, and in it, a shadow loomed behind my desk. The photograph loaded slowly on my phone, pixel by pixel, as if it wanted to prolong the damage. It was my office, my desk, my chair pushed back slightly, just as I'd left it the night before. The angle was wrong. too high, too deliberate, and behind the desk, faint but unmistakable in the reflection of the framed glass, stood a shadow that didn't belong to me. My stomach tightened. Harold studied the image in silence. "This wasn't taken last night," he finally said. "The lighting's off. That means she's had access before." I swallowed. "You're saying she's been inside more than once?" "Yes," he replied, "and she wanted you to know that now." The message attached to the photo was brief. "You're always reacting. Try getting ahead." I set the phone down, forcing my hands to stay steady. Fear was no longer sharp. It was dull, heavy, and dangerous, the kind that made people slip. "This wasn't about stealing anything," I said. "It's psychological. She wants me doubting every memory, every space." Harold nodded, "Which means we changed the game." By noon, we'd installed additional cameras, hidden, layered, overlapping, motion sensors tied directly to my phone, a secondary phone placed in the office, recording independently. Redundancy on top of redundancy. "If she comes back," Harold said, "we don't stalk her, we catch her." That evening, I did something intentional. I left the office exactly as it was. Same folders, same lamp angle, same chair slightly askew. I wanted the room to look untouched, predictable. If Vanessa was watching, and I knew she was, she'd assume I was still playing defense. The hours passed slowly, too slowly. Just after midnight, one of the hidden cameras triggered. Not movement, not sound. Access. A silent alert flashed on my phone. Someone had breached the internal sensor without triggering the exterior alarms. Professional. Confident. Harold was already on his way. I watched the live feed, heart pounding, as a familiar figure stepped into frame. Vanessa. Calm, unhurried, smiling. She walked straight to my desk, leaned forward, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she looked directly into the camera and waved. The next morning, the police called because Vanessa had filed a report first, accusing me of stalking and harassment.
The police arrived just after sunrise. 2 officers stood at my door, professional, neutral, unreadable, the kind of faces trained not to react to panic or outrage. One of them held a tablet, the other rested a hand near his belt, not threatening, just prepared. "Mrs. Whittemore," the taller one said, "we've received a complaint filed against you." I already knew what it was. "Stalking, harassment, illegal surveillance," he continued. "The complainant alleges you've been tracking her movements and collecting footage without consent." Vanessa hadn't just escalated, she'd flipped the narrative. I let them in and sat at the table, hands folded, voice calm. Panic would only validate her story. "I have evidence," I said, "and counsel." They exchanged a glance. "We'll need to see everything." Harold arrived moments later, perfectly timed. He placed a sealed folder on the table and slid it forward. Inside were timestamps, access logs, sensor triggers, metadata, every digital footprint Vanessa had left behind. "These cameras were installed after an unlawful entry," Harold said evenly, "and they're restricted to private property. The complainant appears on the footage without authorization." The officers reviewed the material in silence. One of them finally looked up. "This changes things." "Yes," Harold replied. "It does." They stayed another 30 minutes, asking precise questions. I answered carefully, truthfully, letting the documentation speak louder than emotion. When they left, no charges had been filed, no warnings issued, but I knew better to feel relief. "She expected this," Harold said once the door closed. "She wanted to see how quickly you'd fold or lash out." "She wanted leverage," I replied, "and when that didn't work, she'll try something messier." I checked my phone. 3 missed calls, unknown number. Then a message came through. "You're good," it read, "but good isn't enough." I deleted it without replying. By afternoon, the story was already shifting. Vanessa's complaint had triggered internal reviews, banks, legal offices, even my employer asking quiet questions, not accusations, yet. This was the real damage: doubt, suspicion, slow erosion of credibility. "She's poisoning the well," I said. Harold nodded, "which means it's time we stop playing defense." He opened his laptop and turned it toward me. "Because while she was focused on you," he said, "she made a mistake." On the screen was a transaction log, buried, delayed, disguised, but unmistakable. Vanessa hadn't moved the main funds, she'd moved something else. The transaction led to a shell account with one familiar name attached, and it wasn't hers.
The screen glowed in the dim office light, casting long shadows across my notebook. The shell account was complicated. Layers of transfers, fake names, obscure banks. But one thing stood out. A single name kept recurring. Not Vanessa. Not anyone she'd used publicly. "Franklin," I whispered. Harold's eyes narrowed. "One of her associates, low profile, usually keeps clean. This is unusual." I scrolled through the logs. Every time a transfer seemed to stall, Franklin's name appeared as an intermediary, masking the trail. Vanessa was smart, careful, but even the cleverest make patterns. They leave crumbs. "Then we follow the crumbs," I said, leaning forward. "See where she can't hide." Harold nodded. "Exactly, but we have to be surgical. One wrong move and she'll vanish again, leaving nothing behind." We spent the next few hours mapping every transaction, every digital footprint linked to Franklin. IP addresses, timestamps, the tiniest irregularities in transfers, everything. Then, finally, a lead. A private investment account in another state. Large deposits, recent activity. The type of account Vanessa wouldn't touch directly, but Franklin had used it, thinking no one would notice. I felt a flicker of satisfaction. "We've got a handle on at least part of the network," I said. Harold looked at me seriously. "Partial control, yes, but this also tells us she's planning something bigger. You saw how she's escalated. The legal filings, the surveillance, the direct threats. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about control. And Franklin is her pawn." I nodded slowly, realizing the implication. Vanessa hadn't just stolen, she had organized. Every move, every message, every shadowed visit, they were coordinated. But knowing where she moved the funds gave us leverage, and leverage changes the game. I wrote in my notebook, "Track Franklin, intercept before Vanessa acts. She's testing patience, and we're about to test hers." That night, I set up alerts, monitoring Franklin's digital footprints in real time. Each ping, each login, each subtle action was recorded. Every interaction counted. By 2 a.m., I noticed unusual activity. A small transfer to an unknown account. A subtle shift in the pattern we had traced all day. I froze. Harold's voice came over the secure line. "She's moving faster than expected. This isn't random. She's anticipating us." I exhaled slowly, heart racing. This was the moment where strategy mattered more than speed, and patience more than instinct. If we didn't act tonight, the money and Vanessa's next move would vanish forever. And someone was already on the way.
The alert had triggered just past 2 a.m. I was awake, Harold already monitoring from his end. Every ping, every slight movement from Franklin's account was magnified on the screen. The transfers were small, almost unnoticeable, but the pattern was deliberate. "She's moving again," Harold said, voice low but steady. "We can't wait." I grabbed my coat, laptop, and a small bag. Outside, the streets were slick with rain, streetlights reflecting like fractured glass. We weren't chasing her in the traditional sense, not yet, but every piece of information we had could be acted on before she could react. The logs led us to a small, nondescript office building on the edge of town. Security cameras were disabled, or so it seemed. The building's night guard reported nothing unusual, but we knew better. Franklin had been here before. Vanessa had orchestrated every step. Harold and I split up. I took the perimeter, careful to stay unseen, while he moved toward the main entrance. Every instinct screamed caution. One wrong step, and our lead vanished into the night. Then, a flash of movement in the upper windows, a figure slipping through an internal stairwell. Vanessa's style. Calculated, confident, untouchable. I whispered into my phone, "She's here." Harold nodded silently through the line. We followed the trail, quietly, no confrontation yet. We moved like shadows. Every door, every corridor, every corner was accounted for. Franklin appeared briefly at the end of a hallway, checking a laptop. A single hand gesture from him confirmed he knew we were tracking him, but he didn't panic. Vanessa had trained him well. A soft chime on my laptop alerted me. Another transfer had been initiated, faster than before. Vanessa was moving funds while simultaneously orchestrating distractions. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. She wasn't just fast, she was precise, deliberate, and 2 steps ahead. Harold whispered, "Intercept now or risk losing the trail. She won't wait." I nodded, fingers flying over the keys. Firewall bypasses, trace routes, redirect scripts, everything we'd prepared. If she made one more move, we would catch it before it disappeared. The final transfer began to process. I held my breath. Seconds stretched like hours. Then a ping. Success. The funds were frozen mid-transfer. Harold exhaled. Got it. She can't touch it. I let out a slow, shaky laugh, relief mixing with adrenaline, but we both knew this was far from over. Vanessa had been 1 step ahead for weeks. Now we had caught her, but she would escalate. Minutes later, a shadow appeared at my apartment door. Vanessa herself, calm, deliberate, and closer than I had ever imagined.
The shadow at my door moved with unnerving confidence. I froze, gripping the edge of the table. This was no intruder. This was her, Vanessa. The doorbell rang. Not urgently, not frantically. Calm, measured, deliberate. I answered cautiously, keeping the chain lock in place. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, smiling faintly, eyes calculating. "We need to talk." Her presence filled the small foyer like a storm cloud. I stepped back instinctively. "Outside," I said firmly, gesturing to the small patio. "No one else is involved in this. No games." Vanessa tilted her head, still smiling. "Games? Oh, my dear, this has never been a game for me. But for you, maybe it was." I studied her, noting every detail. Hair perfectly in place, posture straight, the faintest scent of expensive perfume lingering in the air. Confidence radiated off her like armor. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, voice steady but cold. "What do you want from me?" She laughed softly, almost melodic but with an edge that cut through the morning air. "Control. You've had it for so long. Money, routine, order. I want to see how far I can push you and how you react when the rules change." I took a careful step forward. "You're escalating. This isn't just theft anymore. You've harassed, threatened, broken into my space, and now you're standing here daring me to act." Her eyes sparkled. "Dare? I'm not daring. I'm testing. You see, the problem isn't me. It's that you keep reacting. Fear, hesitation, compliance. That's your weakness." I swallowed and tightened the grip of the notebook in my bag. Every page, every note, every trace of strategy I'd written down was now my shield. Harold's voice came softly through my earpiece. "Keep calm. Let her talk. Observe. Wait for the slip. Vanessa continued, unaware, or pretending not to notice, the hidden cameras, the active sensors, the silent alerts in motion. I realized she was underestimating me, just as she had underestimated the measures I'd taken after the first breach. "I'm not afraid of you," I said slowly, deliberately, "and I'm not reacting. You've miscalculated." Her smile faltered just slightly, a micro-expression I noticed because I had been trained to see it. And in that moment, I knew the first real move in our counteroffensive was about to begin. Before I could speak again, Vanessa reached into her bag and pulled out something that made my blood run cold. Vanessa's hand slipped into her bag with casual confidence. I froze, every nerve on alert. "Don't," I said, voice firm. She smiled faintly, pulling out a small USB drive, the kind that looked harmless, but I knew better. Data, leverage, proof of her next move, my stolen information, my identity, everything she had been building toward. "This," she said, holding it between two fingers, "is your life in miniature. One wrong move, one false step, and it's gone. Or worse, it's public." I didn't flinch. I had anticipated escalation. I had anticipated threats. But this was the first time it was tangible in my hands, close enough to touch, close enough to shatter months of planning. Harold's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Stay calm. She wants a reaction. We can neutralize this." I nodded subtly, hiding my panic. Every instinct screamed to grab it, to destroy it, but I stayed my hand. Reaction would play into her plan. "You've pushed too far," I said evenly. "You've tested me, my patience, my space, but you've underestimated me." She tilted her head, amused. "Underestimated? I've been keeping careful track. Every move you've made, every countermeasure. I know you're cautious, methodical, but method won't save you when the rules shift." I swallowed and held her gaze. "And yet, here you are, exposed in my home, in my office. You underestimated my preparation. You underestimated how much I've documented, how much I can anticipate." Her smile faltered slightly, a tiny shift, enough to know she had misjudged my response. I reached slowly into my bag, not for the USB, but for a small device Harold had prepared, a portable data freeze. When activated, it would lock the drive, prevent access, and signal its location in real time. She noticed the motion and raised an eyebrow. "Clever, but clever won't stop what's coming." I activated the device. The USB glowed briefly, then went dark. Locked, tracked, useless to her. Her expression hardened, the first real sign of frustration, controlled, but there. "Interesting," she said, replacing the drive in her bag. "You play the long game. Very well, but games always escalate." And with that, she turned and left. Calm, unhurried, smiling, but this time with something sharper beneath it. I exhaled slowly, heart hammering. The first move had been made, countered, but I knew this was only the beginning. By the next morning, my bank account had been hit with a small but deliberate withdrawal. Someone had tested me while I slept, and Vanessa had left a signature behind. Morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, but it did nothing to calm the tension in my apartment. My phone buzzed with notifications, and my bank app glowed red. A small, deliberate withdrawal had been made overnight. Not catastrophic, but precise. Vanessa had tested me to see if I would notice, to see how I'd respond. Harold appeared almost immediately, face grave. "She's probing," he said. "Little moves, small amounts. Each one is a message. I can reach you anywhere, anytime, and you can't stop me." I studied the transaction details. The withdrawal had been routed through multiple accounts, making the trail difficult, but not impossible.
Vanessa had underestimated the layers of monitoring we'd installed. "We trace it," I said, tapping my fingers against the table. "See where it leads." Harold nodded, already analyzing logs. "It's going to take hours to untangle, but the pattern is there. She wants to see our reaction before she escalates further. If we move too fast, she disappears." I leaned back, thinking. Vanessa wasn't just greedy. She was meticulous, calculating, and patient. But so was I now. Every step she made could be anticipated. Every move could be turned into leverage. Hours passed in a tense blur. Emails, calls, transaction logs, everything converged into a map of Vanessa's small maneuvers. Franklin's role became clearer. He wasn't acting independently. Every move he made was coordinated, timed, measured. Finally, Harold looked up, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. "Got it. The funds were routed through a shell account she doesn't check regularly. If we intercept now, we can recover the amount and use this to bait her." I nodded slowly. This was the counterstrike we'd been preparing for. A small victory, but crucial. A demonstration that she couldn't touch anything without consequence. I wrote a single line in my notebook. She tests. We respond. She escalates. We anticipate. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Text message. "Nice try, but the game is far from over." I didn't reply. Harold's gaze was sharp. "She's preparing something bigger. I can feel it. This isn't about the money anymore. It's about control, intimidation. She wants to see how far she can push before we break." I exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline settle just enough to focus. Fear was no longer an option. Preparation, observation, countermeasures. Those were my weapons now. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the chessboard we were playing in a small apartment. But inside, the war had only just begun. By nightfall, an unmarked van pulled up across the street, engine idling quietly, and someone was watching my window. The van didn't move. It sat across the street, engine idling softly, headlights off, just far enough to blend into the shadows. Too deliberate to be coincidence, too patient to be random. I watched from behind the curtain, careful not to shift the fabric. Experience had taught me that being seen watching was worse than not looking at all. Harold was already aware. "It's been there 12 minutes, he said through the secure line. "Same position, same idle pattern. Someone's inside." "Franklin?" I asked. "Unlikely," he replied. "This feels outsourced. Observation, not action." Vanessa was escalating again, but carefully. No break-ins, no threats, just presence. A reminder that she could apply pressure without leaving fingerprints. I forced myself to sit at the table, notebook open, pen steady. Fear made people sloppy. I refused to be sloppy. Minutes passed, then 20, then 30. The van remained. A soft vibration buzzed through my phone. "You still feel safe?" No number, no signature, but I knew. I didn't respond. Instead, I triggered the internal protocol Harold and I had prepared earlier that day. Exterior cameras shifted angles, license plate capture activated, infrared engaged. Passive, legal, silent. If Vanessa wanted to be seen, I would see everything. "Plates cloned," Harold said after a moment. "Fake registration, but the driver made a mistake." I held my breath. "What kind?" "They powered a secondary device. Brief signal spike. We caught it." I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Some valence worked both ways. The van finally moved, slowly pulling away, unhurried, confident it had done its job. But the damage it intended to cause hadn't landed the way Vanessa expected. She wanted anxiety. What she got was data. An hour later, Harold sent me a still image pulled from the footage. The driver's face was partially obscured, but familiar enough to trigger recognition. Franklin. Not cautious, not hidden, personally involved.
That's reckless, I said quietly. Yes, Harold agreed, and that tells us something important. She's losing control, I finished. Vanessa had always used distance, shell accounts, intermediaries, legal smoke, but now she was putting people physically in place. That meant pressure, urgency, mistakes. I wrote a new line in my notebook. When predators feel cornered, they get visible. The night passed without further incident, but the silence felt loaded, temporary, artificial. By 8:17 a.m., Harold called with one sentence that changed everything. Franklin's been detained, and he's asking for immunity. Harold's voice came through the secure line, calm but charged with urgency. He's been detained, he said. Franklin, local authorities, and he's asking for immunity. I sank into the chair, heart still hammering. Franklin had been a linchpin in Vanessa's operation, moving funds, masking transfers, coordinating surveillance. If he was talking, everything could unravel. Immunity? I asked, steadying my voice. Yes, Harold replied. He wants protection in exchange for information. He's willing to expose everything if he gets it. I closed my eyes. This was unexpected. The balance was shifting. Vanessa's careful network had a crack, and it had been forced open by one of her own. Harold outlined the situation. Franklin had made a misstep during one of the midnight transfers. Authorities traced it back, intercepted him, and now he was vulnerable. Vanessa had lost her anonymity through her own layers of control. We need to act fast, Harold said. If Vanessa finds out he's cooperating, she could disappear, or worse, try to silence him. I nodded, already thinking 2 steps ahead. Arrange a secure location. I want him isolated, protected, and talking. Every detail, every connection. By late afternoon, Franklin was in a secure facility. At first, he was reluctant, defensive, wary. But the promise of immunity and a clear path to safety broke down his resistance. Slowly, he began to reveal the architecture of Vanessa's operation: shell accounts, intermediaries, surveillance schedules, and methods of intimidation. I listened, pen in hand, mapping everything in my notebook. Each piece of information was a weapon, a tool, a countermeasure against Vanessa. Hours passed. The more he spoke, the clearer the patterns became. Vanessa's reach, once vast and impenetrable, was suddenly traceable. Every move she had made over the last weeks could now be anticipated or even blocked. By evening, Harold and I had a full operational map. It was intricate, layered, and dangerous, but it gave us leverage we hadn't had before. Vanessa was clever, but we had her central pivot: Franklin. I closed my notebook, feeling the first glimmer of real control. She underestimated the human element, I said. She trusted loyalty, but loyalty falters when fear outweighs trust. Harold nodded. She's going to notice this, soon, and when she does, she'll escalate again. I stood, looking out at the city lights. This was no longer just about money. It was about exposing her, dismantling her control, and making sure she couldn't harm anyone else. That night, a single text arrived on my phone. "You think you've won. You're wrong." And it was signed with Vanessa's handwriting. The message burned on my phone. "You think you've won. You're wrong." Harold and I exchanged a glance. It wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration. Vanessa was aware that Franklin had been compromised, and now the real escalation was beginning. "We knew this was coming," Harold said, voice tight. "She won't go quietly. Expect something personal, something designed to intimidate." I nodded, staring out the window at the quiet street. Vanessa's previous moves had been strategic: legal threats, surveillance, minor thefts. Now, this was personal, calculated to make me react, to shake my control. By mid-morning, subtle signs began to appear. My mailbox was rifled through. Nothing stolen, but items scattered. Footprints in the garden, too deliberate to be random. A car parked across the street, engine off, driver's face hidden behind tinted windows. "She's sending messages again," Harold muttered, reviewing the live feeds. "She wants you to feel unsafe. She wants you to overreact." I stayed calm. Each step she took was being documented, every movement traced, recorded, and analyzed. She had underestimated how prepared I had become. Then the first direct escalation hit. A package arrived. Unmarked, heavy. Inside, a single item. A watch. Expensive. Deliberately placed with a note attached. "Time is running out." It was a clear message. She was watching, calculating, and reminding me that every move I made could be anticipated. I didn't panic. I documented everything. Photograph, note, video logs. Harold and I discussed countermeasures, safe rooms, controlled communication, tracking every intermediary she might use. "She's changing tactics," I said, "from financial and psychological to physical, from observation to provocation." "Yes," Harold confirmed, "and this is exactly what she wants. She wants us reactive. We can't be. We need to force her to make mistakes." By evening, additional surveillance revealed movement near my apartment, shadows shifting, someone placing small devices near entrances, cameras, and doors. Vanessa's network was still active, still bold, but now it was traceable. I updated my notebook. She escalates, she tests, she exposes herself. Watch carefully, counter decisively. The night stretched long, filled with the hum of monitors and quiet alerts. Vanessa was dangerous, but now predictable. Just past midnight, a single silhouette appeared at the far edge of my garden, holding something in hand, and I realized Vanessa had crossed the line into direct confrontation. The silhouette didn't move at first. It stood at the edge of the garden, half lit by the security light, perfectly still. Whoever it was wanted to be seen, wanted me to notice. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Harold's voice came through my earpiece, low and sharp. "Don't approach. Cameras are live. I see the figure." "I know," I whispered. "She wants proximity, not chaos." The figure took a slow step forward, then another, careful, deliberate. In one hand, they held something small, metallic, catching the light just enough to make my pulse spike. "This is escalation," Harold said. "Physical intimidation. She's forcing a reaction." I stayed where I was, behind the reinforced glass, hands clenched but steady. If Vanessa wanted fear, she wouldn't get it from me. The figure raised their arm and placed the object gently on the garden table. Then they stepped back, turned, and disappeared into the darkness without a word. No confrontation, no violence, just a message. Harold arrived minutes later. Together, we approached the table cautiously. The object was a phone, old, scratched, powered off. I didn't need to turn it on to know whose it was. "It's Franklin's," Harold said quietly. "She's telling us she knows he talked." My throat tightened. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. It was about warning. Vanessa was signaling that cooperation had consequences. Harold examined the phone carefully. "If she left this here, it means she's confident or desperate." "Both," I replied. Inside, we powered the device in a controlled environment. Messages flooded the screen. Deleted threads, partially recovered, timestamps altered, instructions sent late at night. Evidence of coordination, evidence of pressure, and something else. A draft message never sent, written by Franklin. "She's losing control. If you're reading this, protect yourself." I closed my eyes briefly. Vanessa hadn't just crossed a line. She had exposed herself emotionally, and emotional actors make mistakes. She wanted us rattled. Instead, she handed us proof. Harold nodded. And motive. I wrote one final line in my notebook for the night. She's no longer managing the board. She's reacting. Outside, the silence was silent again, but the silence felt different now. Thin, fragile, temporary. Because when someone realizes they're losing control, they don't retreat. They strike. At dawn, an emergency injunction was filed in court, naming me as the immediate threat and Vanessa as the victim.
The legal notice arrived mid-morning, thick, official, stamped with urgency. Vanessa's name was on it, my name, accused. The language was precise: harassment, intimidation, unlawful surveillance. Everything I had done to protect myself was now being twisted against me. Harold stood beside me, I scanning the document. "She's setting the stage," he said quietly. "This isn't about law. It's about pressure, making you doubt yourself, force mistakes, and make you look guilty." I read the notice again. Every word felt like a calculated strike. Vanessa had clearly anticipated the sequence. Franklin compromised, her threats escalated, and now the courts. She was cornering me legally, emotionally, psychologically. "They're filing for a temporary restraining order," Harold continued. "We need evidence, fast. Everything logged. Entries, surveillance, threats, timestamps. Every single thing." I opened my notebook, flipping to the section where I had meticulously recorded every message, every package, every unauthorized entry. It was extensive. Photos, timestamps, call logs, sensor readings, evidence she could not refute. By noon, we had compiled the full dossier, digital and physical copies, cross-referenced and verified. The goal was clear: counter the injunction, expose her strategy, and show the court the true aggressor. When we arrived at the courthouse, the lobby was bustling, but my focus was narrow. Vanessa was already there, poised, calm, exuding that same air of control that had defined her for weeks. I could feel the attention she commanded, the subtle intimidation. The hearing began quickly. Her attorney spoke first, laying out the accusations with precision. Every word was designed to paint me as unstable, aggressive, and threatening. I listened, silent, methodical. Then it was my turn. Harold handed me the compiled dossier. I presented evidence systematically: photos, timestamps, logs, Franklin's testimony, digital records. Each point dismantled her narrative. Her smile faltered slightly as the judge examined the evidence. Every calculated move she had made was now exposed. When the judge asked for my statement, I spoke clearly, deliberately. "I have acted solely to protect myself and my assets from unlawful intrusion, surveillance, and threats. Every step taken was documented, and now the truth is presented." The courtroom was silent. The balance had shifted. Vanessa's confident posture remained, but I could sense cracks beneath the surface. As we left the courthouse, my phone buzzed with a new message. "You've won a battle, not the war. Watch carefully." The courthouse steps felt heavier than usual. Victory was supposed to be sweet, but my phone buzzed again, cutting through any sense of relief. "Nice try, but you're predictable." Vanessa's signature. Calm, calculated, and loaded with menace. She had lost the court battle, but not the war. Harold glanced over my shoulder. "She's sending a message," he said. "Testing limits, seeing how you'll react." I took a deep breath. Patience was my weapon now. Overreaction would play into her hands. By late afternoon, subtle signs began to appear. A series of small, anonymous deliveries to my building. Nothing dangerous, nothing overtly threatening. A single envelope with a fingerprint partially wiped off. Another with shredded paper inside. Minimalist, psychological. She wasn't attacking physically yet, but she was reasserting control.
I call it a warning shot, Harold said. She wants anxiety. She wants unpredictability in you. And she's experimenting. I examined the envelopes carefully. Each one was a puzzle, a deliberate statement of presence. She was reminding me that she could reach me anywhere. My defenses were working, yes, but she was probing them, measuring reaction, refining strategy. By late afternoon, the pattern became clear. The deliveries were increasing in frequency, appearing at precise intervals, each with a small variation. Someone was orchestrating this from inside her network. Franklin had been compromised, but others remained active. I updated my notebook. Phase, psychological pressure. Method, controlled escalation. Objective, destabilize. Then the final message of the day arrived. Not a text, not a call, but an email from an unknown account. Attached, a single photo of my car parked outside the apartment. Someone had placed a GPS tracker under the vehicle. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Vanessa was testing boundaries, escalating. She was reminding me that no victory was absolute. Harold checked the device remotely. "We can track it," he said, "and we can remove it safely, but the message is clear. She knows proximity and movement matter." I nodded. This wasn't just harassment, it was calculated intimidation, a warning shot to test resolve. But now, armed with the tracker's data and Franklin's testimony, I had the leverage to anticipate her next move. I wrote one final line for the night. Predict, control, counter. She escalates, we neutralize. The night grew quiet, but the tension remained taut, like a bowstring ready to snap. Vanessa had been forced back by the court, but she was far from finished. At 3 a.m., the building's exterior lights flickered, and I saw a shadow move across the roof. Someone was watching, waiting, and this time they weren't just sending a warning. The shadow on the roof vanished before I could react. The exterior lights stabilized, washing the building in pale white again, but the sense of safety did not return. My instincts were screaming. This wasn't a message anymore. This was a breach. I grabbed my jacket, notebook, and phone and moved toward the stairwell instead of the elevator. If someone was on the roof, I needed to confirm it before they disappeared completely. Every step echoed too loudly as I climbed, the metal railing cold beneath my hand. When I pushed the roof door open, the night air hit me hard. Empty. No footsteps. No voices. But the access panel near the HVAC unit was open. Fresh scratches along the edge. Metal bent just enough to confirm forced entry. Someone had been here minutes ago. I took photos from multiple angles and sent them to Harold. His reply came instantly. "Do not pursue. This changes everything." He was right. This wasn't intimidation anymore. It was escalation into physical proximity. Vanessa had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. As I descended, my phone vibrated again. Unknown number. "Stop running," Vanessa said when I answered. Her voice was smooth, almost amused. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "You violated a court ruling," I said, keeping my tone steady. "You've exposed yourself." She laughed softly. "Only if you can prove it was me." That was the game. Always plausible deniability, always one step removed. When I reached my apartment, something felt wrong immediately. The door was locked, but the lock had been turned back slightly, not enough to open, just enough to be noticed by someone who knew where to look. Inside, nothing appeared stolen, nothing obviously disturbed, but the air felt different, heavier. On the kitchen counter sat my notebook. Open. A single line had been written in red ink across a blank page. "You missed the point." My chest tightened. I hadn't brought the notebook upstairs. I backed out of the apartment and called Harold again. This time his voice was sharper. "She wanted you to find that," he said. "She wants fear. But she made a mistake." "What mistake?" "She entered your private space. That's no longer psychological pressure. That's criminal trespass. And now we stop reacting." By dawn, security footage from nearby buildings confirmed movement on the roof and stairwell. A hooded figure, unclear face, but the timing matched Vanessa's call perfectly. She had overplayed her hand. For the first time since this began, I felt the shift. Not fear, but certainty. The end was coming, and Vanessa knew it. As the sun rose, Harold sent a final message. We're not defending anymore. Today, we set the trap.
By mid-morning, the plan was in motion. Harold arrived with two things: a warrant application and a quiet confidence I hadn't seen before. "She thinks you're rattled," he said, "that you're reacting emotionally. That's her blind spot." The security footage, the forced roof access, the tampered lock, the notebook left behind, it formed a clean pattern of escalation. Psychological pressure had turned into physical intrusion. The law finally favored us. But a warrant alone wasn't enough. Vanessa wouldn't walk into a courtroom trap. She needed to believe she still had control. We leaked it. A carefully constructed signal, one she couldn't resist. Through a monitored channel she had used before, a message was planted suggesting I was preparing to leave the city, selling assets, closing accounts, running. "Predators don't chase strength," Harold said. "They chase retreat." By afternoon, the hook worked. My phone rang from a blocked number. I didn't answer. Minutes later, another call. Then a text. "Smart move. Let's talk before you disappear." We responded, not directly, but indirectly. A single time and place, chosen carefully. A private parking structure downtown. Cameras everywhere, controlled access points, law enforcement already positioned, unmarked, and patient. Everything hinged on one assumption, that Vanessa couldn't resist a final confrontation where she believed she held the advantage. At 9:40 p.m., she arrived. I watched from the upper level as her car rolled in, headlights cutting through concrete shadows. She stepped out composed, confident, dressed like this was a business meeting instead of a reckoning. "You're late," she said calmly when she saw me. "I wanted to be sure you came alone," I replied. She smiled, still pretending you're in control. What she didn't know was that every movement, every word, every breath was being recorded. Her phone pinged as she spoke. Location confirmation, probable cause, finalized. She stepped closer. "You could have avoided all of this," she said. "You made it personal." "No," I answered. "You did when you entered my home." Her expression shifted for the first time. Just a flicker, but it was there. That was when the lights came on. Unmarked vehicles flooded the structure. Officers moved, fast, precise, controlled. Vanessa froze, realization hitting her too late. "This is a mistake," she said sharply as they approached. "No, it's the consequence." As she was detained, she turned to me one last time. The confidence was gone, replaced with something colder, calculation recalibrating even in defeat. "This isn't over," she said quietly. I met her gaze. "It is for you." As the officers led her away, my phone buzzed with one final notification, an alert from an unknown account that simply read, "You were only the first target." The city felt quieter the next morning, though the tension didn't immediately lift. Vanessa was in custody, her network dismantled, Franklin cooperating fully, and the shell accounts frozen. On paper, it was over. I sat in my apartment, notebook closed, coffee in hand. Weeks of surveillance, threats, and psychological warfare had ended, but the exhaustion lingered in my bones. Every alert, every call, every shadow across the street played in my mind like a slow-motion replay. Harold joined me, carrying a small folder. "The courts have cleared you. Restraining orders against her, full documentation accepted. Any attempt to contact you further will be treated as harassment and criminal trespass." I nodded, relief mingling with a strange sense of emptiness.
It had been a war fought in shadows, numbers, and nerves, but victory felt quieter than expected. We reviewed the final pieces of evidence: emails, device logs, photographs. Every tactic Vanessa had used was documented, every breach accounted for, every attempt to intimidate rendered powerless by preparation and observation. "I hope this sends a clear message," Harold said, leaning back. "She underestimated patience and preparation." I smiled faintly. She always does. But as the day stretched, subtle reminders appeared that control is never absolute. An unknown email slipped through my spam filter, a GPS ping on a device I thought removed. Nothing actionable, nothing immediate, but reminders that Vanessa's reach had tested me in ways that would linger. I wrote one last line in my notebook. Control is never given, it is maintained. And now, it is mine. Hours later, I returned to the garden. The sunlight fell on plants still thriving under care, routine, and attention. Watering the flowers, I realized that some things, like patience, preparation, and observation, responded to consistency just as well as the soil did. By evening, the city moved on. My life resumed its rhythm. Coffee cups, notebooks, morning routines, work, calls, small victories. Yet a final alert pinged softly on my phone. I opened it. A simple message, no number, no signature. "You were only the first target." I smiled, closing the device. Some battles never truly end, but some are won decisively, and this one, at least, was mine. The window behind me reflected the fading sunlight, calm and steady. For now, the storm had passed.